The story begins in 1919, but before that, it began with a young boy coming through Ellis Island, and they worked their way to Detroit. And that young boy worked at Ford Motor Company. And he worked first as sweep, and then he worked as an accountant. He was very good with numbers. But he wanted to do more, so he began Joseph Holtzman Homes. He was a product of being a self-made man in America. I mean, he was a product of the American dream.
I first met the Holtzmans through Joe Holtzman, who was really a good friend of my father's. They were very honorable people who really knew their business. And they built our first house, by the way. They were notable because when we moved into our house, it had central air conditioning.
Joe built his houses to a higher standard, adding some quality details at a price that for other builders was an extra. One of the great innovations was the Whitcomb home, the first modern quality house in Detroit that was affordable to the average American family. This first model was built in 1928 at 15333 Whitcomb.
My name is Merlin Jackson. Welcome to my home, 15333 Whitcomb. The workmanship of the house, the molding, the ceilings, all of this was here, and I love it. When people come in, they look around, they say, wow, how old did you say this house is? I said, the house is almost 90 years old. We had our own house, raised our kids, and happy ever after.
One of Joe's most important relationships was Jason Honeyman.
Well, we're sitting in Jason Honeyman's office. He's probably regarded as the finest lawyer who ever practiced law in Michigan. Joe was Honeyman's first client.
Joe relied heavily on the business and legal advice of Jason Honeyman.
They were married to sisters. Edith Honeyman and Ellen Holtzman were sisters. The families were very, very close.
What began as the first generation relationship with the Honeyman law firm continued throughout the second generation, and now the third generation will continue into our second 100 years. Joe Holtzman was such a dynamic businessman, but he was much more dynamic of an individual. He did not believe in discrimination at any level. Joe took a position and fought against banks and mortgage companies in order to sell a home to anyone who was qualified.
Besides the fact that he was an outstanding businessman, he was fiercely devoted to Israel. And he raised a lot of money for Israel at a very important time for the country because it was young.
He went on to become one of the national and international leaders in the American Jewish community and working with what was eventually the State of Israel. As I think about the period of time of Joseph Holtzman Homes, I think it matched well with what was happening in America. One of the great dreams was to own a single-family home. Joseph Holtzman Homes was a story of really what was taking place in America, and they were making an immediate impact, and they were leading. My father, Erwin T. Holtzman, joined the company in the 40s. My uncle, David Holtzman, entered into the company in the early 50s.
My relationship with David goes back. I was maybe 21 years old. Well, David was very interested in building things, building houses in particular, and he was very good with his hands and his eyes. He had his older brother, Toby, who was a very diligent worker.
I think it's the beginning of where the home builders and the land developers were starting to change. There was the need for retail shopping centers and grocery stores There was need for industrial buildings. There was need for office buildings and medical office buildings. And it was the beginning of a rental apartment community. So I would say the second generation saw the diversity of real estate. My father started to think about rental apartments. But as he thought about rental apartments, he said it should have a brand. It should have a name. This was very innovative. So the first rental apartment community that they owned and operated was in Southgate. It was called Village Green. And that was the name that would stick with the company all the way until 2016. Well, my father, again, this theoretical person said, I'm going to put microwave ovens in every one of our apartments to try to be an innovative leader. And one day my father says that he's going to do a solar house. And this was in the early 70s. Or my father and uncle are going to say, we'll do a mixed-use development. We'll have an apartment building, we'll have a Detroit Public Library, we'll have a Farmer Jack. And so Elmwood had a branch of the Detroit Public Library. So it was a wonderful connection between this innovative idea of a mixed-use development and his passion for literature and education. I think they were taking elements of Joe Holtzman, the marketing side, the quality side, the innovative side.
I remember hearing stories. They were legends. They built homes. They were focused. And it was a family that was united around a goal.
By the time we were done building single-family homes and condominiums, we built 25,000 units. I had a dynamic uncle and a dynamic father on top of that, a dynamic grandfather. So tremendous amount of influences as I came into the business. Coming into the family business was not my first choice. I wanted to be a professional race car driver. And I almost made it. I was very, very good. I just wasn't great. When I started in the late 70s, there wasn't the thinking of how would you service the customer? How would you manage the apartment community? And that gave me the biggest opportunity. My first Village Green apartment communities were Village Green of Southgate West and Village Green of Southfield.
Our first project together was the Riverfront Apartments.
Alfred Taudman and Max Fisher invited Village Green to be part of Riverfront, a major mixed-use development along the water in downtown Detroit.
And it was clear that he had an amazing eye for things, remarkable taste, really detail-oriented, even as a young businessman.
I became partners with Ron Bennick and Wayne Moretti from Chicago.
We said, okay, on the apartment side, that's going to make sense because that passion was such a focus, we don't have to have the focus on it because he does. So that's really why we made the investment.
And we began the expansion of Village Green, the 4 brands, the multiple cities, the third-party management, the different departments and the companies. The Village Green, the single brand, evolved to Village Parks. And we were one of the first in the country that would buy an existing apartment community and renovate the apartments, and we would make it modern. As we got into the 90s, you started to see now a shift back to the cities. So we needed another brand called City. The architecture, design, technology, and amenities and services, it began. Looking at the changing demographics, we developed the 4th brand called Regents Park. A little bit more sophisticated or elegant, higher level of customer service and finishes.
To be able to do that and continue with a focus and a passion on business takes a very strong person.
I don't think I'd be where I am today without their investment and their trust in me. As I think about my 40 years, there were periods of the economy that were very challenging.
So I would like to talk about what happened during the Great Recession. A lot of people in the real estate business started giving back properties, defaulting, foreclosures, bankruptcies. Jonathan would have none of that. And one of the deals that we were working on was in Minneapolis.
And it was done in the heart of the recession in 2009. It was the only project in Minneapolis with the tower crane that year. John somehow saw the financing, he got it done, and we started it in 2009, and it's a great project.
That was the only ground-up multifamily real estate transaction that closed, certainly in the Midwest. It's always been very important for him that in order to preserve his integrity and his credibility, he will stand behind every obligation that he has ever made.
I haven't invested with anybody as much as I have with John. We've had 9 deals, and we're looking forward to do a couple a year.
Keeping these commitments is consistent with his family's history and character and with the kind of company and business that he wants to be associated with. It's a lot of time and effort and blood and sweat and tears, and there's the right way to do things, and then there's any other way of doing it, and he's only going to do it the right way.
It takes a dedication, and it takes a mindset that says, I will not be turned back. And that's Jonathan Holtzman. You couldn't stop him from doing what you wanted. If you tackled him, tied him up, threw him in the Detroit River, he'd come out swimming still talking about the cash flow.
Coming out of the recession of 2008, we could see this demographic, this economic, this home ownership, and this rental urban change. And Village Green was based on this suburban business model. The decision was to sell Village Green.
John approached me in October of 2015, taking what we were completing from a city brand perspective at Village Green and creating the next level of an apartment project. And that's obviously the City Club brand. There's a feeling of just pure excitement because we knew that the business plan that we had was to create these incredible assets. And from that respect, that's when City Club began.
So what was almost a 100-year-old company essentially became a startup.
Good afternoon, City Club Apartments, Elizabeth speaking. How may I direct your call?
I had a good friend, Alan Greenberg, that I had known and respected, and so began the opportunity to think about a brand that could not only be in America, but maybe it could be North America, Europe, and Asia.
It's very obvious today that apartments are not what they used to be. And we, with our architects, create what these environments can be and should be. So the design of the amenity spaces and the courtyard spaces, they are very much more today social environments, residential environments, networking environments that provide a great social community.
And that's the idea behind City Club. There isn't a set of rules other than what does the customer want? And we have to think about the future in the respect of what do they want before they realize that they want it.
City Club was a very interesting development. The finishes in the units were always the best and had great loft units with these wood stairs that made it feel more residential than a commercial stair.
Whether it's his unique closet systems, whether it's bathroom layouts or unit layouts, he's very much into the details of the individual residential unit. And he continues to stay focused on the resident's point of view.
The hospitality industry understood how to make the customer happy, and they only had one night to do it. The apartment industry, our renter stays an average of 2 years. So our focus was to duplicate the hospitality industry. How we hired and trained, promoted from within, and compensated for this excellence of customer service. As I think about an executive, starting at the bottom, their experience is very dynamic.
I started with Village Green right out of college, beginning as a manager in training to now my role as Chief Investment Officer and Operating Officer, now moving into the transition phase of becoming the CEO. Anyone can take their career as far as they want to take it. We provide a tremendous amount of opportunities for people to pursue. And as we grow, we're developing 3 projects a year. So the amount of executive staff that we're going to need at the top level is only going to continue to grow. The preference for us is to promote everyone from within.
I've always been a product of innovations. And if we constantly innovate, I think we'll continue to be a leader in our industry. As I think about the future, I think things now are merging in every aspect. And I think that's what City Club is. Your entertainment, your culture, in your work, your social, every aspect of who you are, you can fully take advantage of because we've created this environment